going on, guys? Back again on another Thursday, man. Just coming to you a day after Canada Day, man. Happy belated or something. Yeah, so that date, July 1st, is somewhat of the impetus to my rant today. And although we recognize that as Canada Day, July 1st is also a very important date in music, at least in my interaction with music. It happens to be the anniversary of a little device that was released on the world that I think revolutionized things. It's actually the date back in 1979 that a little item called the Walkman was released upon the world. And if you don't know, if you're that young and don't know what a Walkman was, I will show you a pic. But there is the original here, put out by Sony, like I said, back in 1979. And yeah, man, like I mentioned, it revolutionized the way we interacted with music. I know mine that I had back in the 80s there, that was a prized possession of mine. I brought it everywhere, and I spent, many days working on mixtapes, and I would travel with a backpack full of them and extra batteries, because that was one of the big problems with the Walkman, was that the batteries would drain pretty quickly. So you wouldn't want to waste juice by rewinding or whatever. I would often stick a pencil in the lead wheels and kind of spin it around until I could get it to the spot I wanted to save on battery juice. But like I said, prized possession of mine, man. I absolutely love that thing. I was able to bring my music wherever I was and have like a personalized concert just for me. And I think a lot of people shared my love of this ability. So yeah, I mean, long illustrious career of the Walkman. I think as of 2010 they stopped producing these things, but by that point they had created over 200 million of these things, and that's just in the cassette form. They actually went on to make other renditions that would utilize CDs. They made the Discman. Didn't work out as well for them. They were pretty funky. They would skip all the time and things like that. So anyways, I thought, because of that particular device and how that made me sort of look or interact with the music differently, it started making me think about how each new technology or iteration of music has changed how it was recorded, how we interacted with it. And so I thought we could take a little look at sort of the history of recorded music. I think, the age of music has been almost as long as we as people have been on Earth. But recorded music has had a much shorter life, and that's certainly changed things. Obviously, originally, if you wanted to hear music, you had to be a part of it being performed live. There was no take-home versions. There was no redos. It was all live. So obviously, once we were able to record, that changed things quite drastically. So yeah, we're gonna go way back. But first off, I thought, on that note of music being around for so long, that maybe I would play a little snippet of this. It's called the Hurricane Hymn, and this dates back to, I think, 1400 BC or so. So it's old. And obviously, this recording is from present. Someone picked up some old instruments that we think they might have used at the time and tried to put this down as closely to what it was originally performed as. So, yes, the Hurricane Hymn. Kind of cool. Right, but that brings us to, like I said, Mr. Thomas Edison, well-known inventor. He produced a lot of stuff, but one of his, what I think is claim to fame would be, is his phonograph. So his phonograph was sort of the proto record player, if you will. Now, these things didn't work out super well, but I'll play a little snippet of some phonograph music so you can check out. Super old school. So the phonograph, like I said, was a kind of a proto early version of the record player. Now, originally, I think they used kind of like a cylinder instead of a disc, like the vinyl records that we know today. But interesting enough, the device could actually record as well. Now, the recordings weren't that hot. They ultimately would probably have one go, and then they wouldn't work again. Originally, I think they were carved into some kind of foil, and then they messed around with some different glass cylinders. But there you can see it. It's got that big horn right there, and then the sort of cylinder where the actual music is embedded. And like I said, pretty janky. The recordings didn't work out all that well, but it was the first ability to actually record music and listen to it later. Obviously, because of that design, you had that big horn. That's where the sound came in to be recorded. And so that limited how you could record. You couldn't have a whole bunch of musicians spread out all over the place. They had to be directly in front of that horn. And the same thing goes for sort of its the next kind of iteration, which was a little bit better, a mechanical device called the gramophone. And very similar to the Edison version, but a little bit larger, and they used sort of more what we know of today as records. So I'll show you a pic of that guy there, just to give you the idea. A little bigger horn up there, the big bell, and then you can see the disc laying on the turntable there, much more looking like a modern day vinyl record. However, they were not at that point using vinyl, and we're going back to the late 1800s, early 1900s. So vinyl wasn't available. They were using rubber and celluloid, which they would put some shellac on and make some pretty good recordings. But they could only put about 20 minutes per side, and they were pretty breakable. So not the best product, but we were getting places. We could make recordings. Like I mentioned, everyone had to gather around that big horn shape in order to make a recording. So loud instruments were the way to go. You didn't want to be drowned out, and you wanted the sound to pick up. So all about loudness at that point. I should mention that shortly thereafter, a man by the name of Marconi had created yet another way that we could interact with music, an even a better way, I think. The radio. And the radio became, a smash hit. Everybody had one in their house, just about. By the 30s, it was such an important focal point that it was almost like a piece of furniture, often with like a big wood cabinet. And yeah, it was, where people would get their news, their music, of course, and entertainment of all sorts. People would gather around for various radio shows that happened. And so this is not so much music related, but something kind of interesting that happened out of the radio shows was a little thing by the author Orson Welles. Now, if you don't know Orson Welles, he wrote some awesome kind of sci-fi crazy stuff back in the day, and namely one of those was a book called War of the Worlds. Now, War of the Worlds he originally produced as a radio show, and I think off the top they mentioned that it was just a show, but some people tuned in partway through and believed that it was legit and real. They thought that the Martians had landed and were attacking planet Earth. So I'll play a little snippet of that. Now, this is going back to like 1938, so keep that in mind. But this, we'll tune in partway through it here.
In view of the gravity of the situation, and believing that radio has a responsibility to serve in the public interest at all times, we are turning over our facilities to the State Militia at Trenton. We take you now to the field headquarters of the State Militia near Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
This is Captain Lansing of the Signal Corps, attached to the State Militia, now engaged in military operations in the vicinity of Grover's Mill. Situation arising from the reported presence of certain individuals of unidentified nature is now under complete control. The cylindrical object, which lies in a pit directly below our position,
surrounded... So there you go. He's starting to describe some UFO that had crash landed and these unknown characters running amok. Obviously aliens, right? The Martians had landed. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, the good people listening at home thought that this was the real deal, and this was actually a news report on aliens crashing into Earth and coming to, rob and pillage and destroy and take over. I don't know. Anyway, I thought that was kind of a cool little history moment. But one of the other things that happened out of radio was obviously that bands figured out how to belt their sound out a little better. It put more emphasis on recording, so that bands were looking at stuff like stereo sound, right? And the stereophonic sound, which became a big thing in the 70s. Definitely created way more elaborate, awesome sounding albums, right? So that was pretty cool. And along just after World War II, I guess we would say, the vinyl record became a thing, and and operated at a different speed, that infamous 33 1/3 RPM speed, and this was the LP, the long playing record, and now you could pack all kinds of songs on there. And this is when music really started to erupt. But one thing that was really cool about the vinyl record, in my opinion, was that packaging. Bands started to really focus in on the art that was there. One band in particular that took off with this idea, and I've spoken about these boys many times before, but the Beatles. Most famously for their album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And if you don't know it, it's a very famous album cover. Hold on here. Doesn't want to show me a super good image for some reason, but anyways, that is kind of what it looked like. All these cutouts of famous people. A whole list. I went through it a couple weeks back, so I won't bore you with the details. But really a cool concept for the art and how those songs were packaged. On top of that, they also had some weirdness. Inside, when you opened up the album, you had these cutouts. So there was that cutout of the mustache that you could, I guess, potentially wear. And then, of course, the military armbands, so you could dress up and look like the Fab Four on the album cover there. So that was kind of crazy. Another thing that they brought to the forefront, I'm not sure if anyone else had done this prior, but they printed all of the lyrics to all of the songs on the inside of the album. So that was really cool. There was some thought by the producers that was a bad idea for some reason. But I think that just made album listening that much more pleasurable. You know, you could follow along while you're listening to some of your favorite songs, right? So many bands went on to include the lyrics of their awesome songs while putting out albums. We'll go through a couple more examples of just like really cool packaging as far as I'm concerned. Some of the different ones. I mean, there's many examples of this. These are just some of my faves. These guys, the Rolling Stones, man, put out this album called Sticky Fingers. Sticky Fingers, well, I'll show you a pic first. See that there? It's a kind of a close-up of a gentleman's crotch there, pretty much. But that zipper, his fly there, was actually a metal zipper, and you could unzip the man's pants if you were so inclined. So it's sort of different there. So many. These guys, a little punk rock action. The Clash actually did sort of a throwback album cover. So you can see that there. There's London Calling, The Clash. Very iconic image of the man there slamming his guitar on the stage in punk rock fashion, but that's actually a throwback. The script, that London Calling on the album cover there, is a throwback from an old Elvis release back in the day, and I'll try to pull some of that out and you'll see very similar there. Same color scheme, same script and everything. So I thought that was kind of a cool way to give homage to older artists, right? Very cool. All right, who else do we got? I don't even remember who I thought to mention. Oh, yes. This one was an interesting one, and I'm sure, I don't know, I wasn't really around at the time, but this man, Mr. Isaac Hayes, produced an album called Black Moses. And I guess oh yeah, that's funky. One of the most interesting things about this one, and he was not the only one to produce an album like this, but if you folded out the entire album cover, it folded out into an image of him on the cross, basically. So I'm sure with that title of Black Moses and the image of the cross, I'm sure he probably upset a few peeps, right? Utilizing biblical images, not always your best bet, right? You can upset a fair bit of people. Of course, these dudes put out their 1984 album, little Van Halen. And this one, I just love this picture. It's so interesting. You've got the little cherub angel there, puffing away on a smoke there, which is so wrong in so many ways, but I just always thought that was a cool little album. Side note, this song, not the positive jam that you think it is. He's actually talking about someone contemplating jumping off of a building, so he's telling him, why don't you just jump? Sorry to ruin your perception of things, but I had to do it. I don't know how many more I got here. A couple more. This one comes to us from Bob Marley and the Wailers, and this packaging was quite interesting. This is probably for a record collector, I would think would have been a very cool piece to get. You can see the actual album cover in the background. It looks like a big old Zippo lighter. And the record itself became sort of the wheel that you would hit to strike the spark on the Zippo lighter. So that one is pretty cool. I kind of got out of record collecting a long time ago. I kind of purged and sold all of mine, but that definitely would have been on my list of wanted items there for sure. So, and then one more just for kicks. This is a group that some of you might not be familiar with, a little band called Spiritualized, and they decided to package one of their albums in a very different manner. Try to show you a pic there. Now that does not look like an album at all. What it actually turned out to be in the form of was like a blister pack for like your medications, and the liner notes and all that jazz were written on what looked like a description of medication and how to take it, and signs and symptoms to watch out for. So very different. You actually had to physically pop out each disc from the blister pack as if it was taking your medicine, which I thought was kind of a different strategy there, but very cool. I imagine for the extreme record collectors, that would be something you would want completely intact, right? For value. So I would want one so I could listen to it, but then I'd have to get another one in order to have it all still done up in the blister pack or whatever. That being said, when I was looking into this jazz, I stumbled upon something that I didn't know about, and it blew my mind. I thought it was so cool, and I can definitely attest to the fact that if I were still collecting records and big on that, I would be all over purchasing one of these guys. They still can be found out of Russia. I stumbled upon these from an organization of that dives into what they refer to as lost culture. And these are out of Russia, like I said. They were, the good people of Russia were living in a very oppressive age, and they were not able to get access to the American rock and roll, which they so wanted. The odd time something would be smuggled in, but the government was not cool with it and would, have it destroyed if they got wind of someone playing some Elvis or some Little Richard. So a few ingenuitive people figured out that they could manufacture or buy what's called a lathe machine, which is the machine that actually encodes the music on a record. It actually carves out those ridges. And they weren't able to get vinyl at this point in time in their history. That was really expensive and difficult to get access to. But one thing they found that they could use and actually record music on very easily was X-rays. The film that X-rays are printed on. And so turns out that whatever they used for X-rays back in the day in Russia were quite flammable and dangerous. So they would, these bootleggers, as they were, would show up with, a bottle of vodka and some rubles, and the nurses would oblige because they had to get rid of these things once a year in order to cut down on any fire hazard. And so they gladly would hand over all of these old X-rays of people's broken bones and whatnot. So, yeah, they began re-recording everything from Elvis to jazz music. So there you go. You can see here is a record from back in the day in Russia. I'm not sure what the recording is on there, but you can see the hands and the bones of the hands in there. Very cool stuff. This just blew my mind. And I'll play a little snippet so you can hear it. It wasn't the best quality shit, that's for sure. Oftentimes they would complain that it looked like sand. There's another one. Looks like a skull there. How cool is that, man? Like I said, if I was still into collecting records, I would have to get my hands on those. There's one more there of looks like some ribs. Very cool stuff. Yeah, and so these guys would actually go around and just like a modern day drug dealer or something, they'd have the coat and they'd open it up and they'd have all these vinyl, well, they weren't vinyl, whatever X-ray film is made out of, and they would ask people, like, you know, what are you into? And then offer them up a little music. And the cool thing is that they were flexible, so they could fold them up, shove a bunch in their sleeves, and no one was the wiser. So I'll play a little snippet. I believe this is the old track "Smoke Gets in Your Eyes," made famous by the Platters. But this is just a instrumental version, but you'll hear the quality of these recordings. Not the best, but still, people wanted their modern music, and this was the only way they could get it in Russia for a time. So, yeah, I just found that so crazy and interesting that even with an oppressive government, you know, the people would find a way to rock and roll, as it were. I just thought that was so cool. Yeah, so of course that brings us to, like I said, post World War II. Germany busts out they were rocking the magnetic tape long before the rest of the world, but after World War II, the rest of the world got access to it. And, there was sort of several different iterations, this big contraption called a reel-to-reel, which many people still loved as a format, but, ultimately the small cassette tape that I grew up rocking became the most popular. It was super portable and super easy to use, and you could make a solid recording on it, and it would last a fair bit, right? And then there was a few other weird ones. The 8-track, if anyone remembers those, quite cumbersome. I think they became as popular as they did due to the fact that many automobile companies would, install a 8-track player in the dash. So those became kind of the way to go for a while. But like I mentioned, the micro compact tape cassette was ultimately the winner and the forerunner for years. I spent, like I said, a lot of time making these mixtapes for girls and stuff, and just for my own enjoyment. And I had stacks and stacks of these things. And then ultimately could pop them into my old Walkman and go cruising and have my own concert going on. And, it's funny, when the Walkman was first released, people were like, oh, no one's going to walk around with headphones on their ears and listen to music. Well, they were wrong. In fact, as the years have continued, you would not, it's not uncommon to, jump on a bus or something and look around, and most of the people have headphones of some kind in. Sometimes the little ear pods, earbuds as they're called, plopped right inside their ears. They're all listening to their own music. Nobody's talking anymore, but that's another story. But anyway, man, oh man, were those naysayers wrong. People love to have their music with them. And then obviously, the CD came shortly thereafter, and that kind of changed things. I guess the best part of CDs in my mind was, they were higher quality supposedly, but the neat part about them was that, yeah, you could just press a button and skip to another song. That was brilliant. And I was rewinding and press and play, or fast forwarding, pressing play, and making sure you got to the right spot. You just hit that button and skip. You were right to the track that you wanted. So that was awesome. And I mean, the CD continued on with that awesome album art and the liner notes and all that. So you still kind of had that. But they were more cumbersome to bring around with you. They could get scratched easily and all this stuff. So that sort of made way, of course. And I mean, the CD was the forerunner for a long time. That's for sure. Until some tinkerers began messing around with, the electronic side of things, and created what are now known as MP3s. So we won't get into too much of the science, because I don't even know it. But MP3s are, of course, what many devices wound up being able to play, and they're kind of computer files of music. Some naysayers with these, they claim that, of course, when you are listening to an MP3, it's a compressed version. If they were, recording it into that format, they needed to compress it, because otherwise it would be such a huge, huge file. Now, to most casual listeners, you would not notice the difference in quality between a regular recording on a CD or a tape even, and an MP3. But the argument is that a lot of sound quality has been lost. So I don't know. You could look into a little thing called the Sound Wars all over YouTube, where people discuss this idea. I just think that the MP3 opened up a whole new world, and mainly because the kids could get access to music wherever they wanted, easily share files. You didn't have to worry about, paying for it. There was plenty of websites where you could just search out songs that you wanted or bands that you liked and download these files for free. Of course, the music industry did not like this revolution. They were quite upset, and ultimately these boys here playing Metallica, they ended up suing one of the bigger companies rocking this, Napster. It was a big website for file sharing, and they sued them into the Stone Age, and that went by the wayside. But the whole idea of file sharing continued forever. What I thought was kind of cool, because there was something lacking in this new iteration of music, and that was just that it was just a computer file. There was no physical side to it, right? You didn't have that album to look at, even in some cases. Sometimes it would come with a little picture on your file, but for the most part it was just this computer file that, when played on whatever device you had, these were a big one back in the day. The iPod, that kind of revolutionized that as well. But there wasn't that tactile portion of it. You didn't have all this cool art to work with. But a few people were like, well, whatever. If my music's just going to be spread around all over the place for free and they're going to cut me out, I'm going to deliver mine in a different way. So much like the album art that I showed you for some of those bands back in the 70s and 80s, some artists were like, well, whatever, I'll just make something that you can't get online, and the true music fans will have to have this, just because that's how music fans are, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples. One that was kind of different and groovy. This is a man by the name of Julian Casablancas. He was a frontman of a little band called The Strokes, but he also had a side project at some point in time called The Voids. And I'll play a little snippet of them. They produced this crazy thing. It's got a sort of a classic looking packaging to it. Looks like something from the 80s, even though this was out in the 90s. Hopefully you can see that all right. So you might recognize the shape. It's actually a lighter. Well, what the hell am I going to do with a lighter? Well, the bottom portion of the lighter could pop off, and it had what's called a USB plug on it, and you could plug that bad boy into your computer or whatever device you had at home and play their album that way. So yeah, you could get their album for free online somewhere, but these guys were like, whatever, man, our fans are gonna want this because it's cool and it's different, and I think they were successful with that. Another band, these guys, well known for being kooky as heck. These guys are known as the Flaming Lips. And they've produced all kinds of zany stuff. Their live performances are well known for just full-blown chaos, people in bear suits and lots of sparkles and balloons and all kinds of stuff floating around. Anyway, they produced one of their albums in a massive gummy skull. Like a gummy bear, but it was a skull. So there's the box, and then beside it was a gummy skull. Yeah, so their album was edible. So inside that big gummy skull came a little USB thumb drive, and you could plug that into your computer and play their music. So as far as I know, even though it was a rather expensive endeavor, they sold out very quickly. The super fans wanted that stuff. So yeah, so all the way along, you know, some people suffer because of changes, and others just figure out how to make it work for them, right? Coming into the forefront now, I mentioned, you know, the advent of the iPod, and that was a pretty cool thing. You were eventually able to just download the music from the interwebs right on to your device. You didn't have to be at home on a computer or anything, so that was pretty cool too. For those people, I think they figured it out. Yeah, all these kids were trading music for free online, but they packaged theirs in a unique way, and you had to pay for it, but the price point was pretty low. It was like $1 a song or something like that most times, and I think people just liked it. It worked really well, and that took over for a while. Their so-called iTunes was the most popular way that people access music. But that brings us to the current state of affairs, where it's completely gone online. But for the most part, there is no physical attributes to it. Most people, at least the youngins, access their music from streaming nowadays. So either from the platform of YouTube, or one of my favorites, something called Spotify. And there's many other versions. Apple has their own Apple Music, and there's a few others. Pandora was one. There's one called Tidal. But anyway, Spotify is my favorite, and all of them are have their own idiosyncrasies and things that you can do with them. I would consider Spotify one of the better ones, but you could sort of classify it as a interactive streaming service. So it's not just like listening to the radio. You can choose whatever song you'd like to hear. There's all kinds of extra information. So something that's been lacking in the music packaging for a long time, there's actually extra stuff now. So when I tap on an artist, I can look up tour dates. I can get follow them so that if they do release new music, I'll get an alert the very day it drops. So that's pretty wild. I can make playlists on the fly, just like, oh, I want to, do up a bunch of songs on this topic. The music that I play every week in my little happy talks here with you guys is utilizing Spotify. So, and I've put those all on the same playlist. So, I don't know, someday I'm going to go back and listen. It's going to be the most random playlist there ever was. It won't make any sense, but I'm kind of random and sometimes don't make sense. So anyway, yeah, and then, something else that I just found out recently was that you can actually make collaborative playlists. So meaning that you can share it, you can start a playlist, share it with somebody else if they're on that streaming service, and they can add or subtract songs to it. So I created one called Music Tag, and I sent a few songs to my younger brother, who's just as much of a music nut as I am, and then he'll put a bunch of songs on there and then send me a message saying, tag, you're it, and then I get to listen to what he's added, and then I add a few more and tag him back and so forth. So it's been a really fun game and a kind of unique way to interact with our music once again. So kind of wild, man. It just makes my interaction with music that much more exciting and entertaining again. Another thing that's really cool with those streaming services is that they have all kinds of suggestion engines, they're called, and things like that. So they pay attention to what you're listening to, and then in my case, every week I get a little list of songs that I should check out. When I go into a band that I'm interested in, as I scroll down, I can even look up other bands that are loosely associated with them that I might so enjoy. So that's kind of a cool way to explore music as well, right? Pretty cool. Yeah, so, I wonder what the future will hold for how, what's going to be the next thing, man. The streaming thing's really taken off, but there are issues, as always. The people that are providing this music they're getting theirs for sure, but the artists are getting cut out hardcore. They often make like fractions of a cent per listen, so it takes a lot of listens to actually make any money at it. So it's changed the biz, right? There was a story in the news a little while ago where some people, I can't think of the name of the band, but they put out an album of 10 songs on Spotify, and they were all silent. There was nothing but 10 tracks that would take up an hour time, and they put it out there on their social media that people should put it on before they go to bed and let it play out, so that they would get money, not much, but money for each play. So and they said that the city with the most plays of this silent album, they would come and do a free concert. And so I think it was a success for them. I don't remember who won, but anyways, they ultimately got a cease and desist letter from Spotify saying, you can't do that, that's ridiculous. But they did say, good on you guys, now stop it. Which I thought was pretty cool. But yeah, we'll have to see what the future holds, man. It could be some kind of even more interactive thing with virtual reality kind of stuff that could put you right in the mix of a concert, so you could actually experience it. I don't know. We'll have to see. But anyways, I think that is about all the time I have, guys. This one went by really fast on my end. Hopefully it does for you as well. But I will sound off and say have a good one, guys. I'll see you next week, hopefully. Take care.